Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Hello and welcome to the panel discussion of World Today. I'm Ding Heng in Beijing. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is the latest leader of a U.S. ally to visit China in pursuit of renewed ties. As the first British leader to set foot on the country in 8 years, Starmer says it is vital to build a more sophisticated relationship with China. Apart from Starmer, China has hosted South Korean President Lee Jae-myung, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, Finnish Prime Minister Petteri Orpo, and Irish leader Michael Martin since the start of 2026. All these countries have been hit by Washington's so-called reciprocal trade tariffs over the past year, and a few have found themselves at odds with U.S. President Donald Trump over his desire to take control of Greenland. In this edition of the program, we will explore why some of the closest traditional allies of the United States are looking to China for a reliable relationship. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. So joining us now on the line are Muhammad Ali Nasir, Professor of Economics at the University of Leeds in Britain and author of the book Off the Target, The Stagnating Political Economy of Europe and a Post-Pandemic Recovery. Liang Linlin, Director of Communication and Research with China Chamber of Commerce to the European Union, and Professor Cui Hongjian from the Academy of Regional and Global Governance, Beijing Foreign Studies University. So, thank you very much for joining us today, Professor Nasir, Professor Cui, and Director Liang. Professor Nasir, to start with you, let's begin by talking about Prime Minister Keir Starmer's China visit. What new opportunities do you think dramatic shifts in geopolitics are creating for China-UK relationship?
Thanks for having me. This visit, which came after 8 years, has brought a lot of opportunities. For the last few years, the relationship between Britain and China, they were on ice. And so this visit has restarted or reignited the relationship. And of course, economically, politically, there are opportunities for Britain, for China, and on both sides, there is consensus that these two countries, they need to engage with each other and facilitate each other, cooperate with each other where possible. So UK, that economy has been struggling for the last few years. UK need investment in various areas. Similarly, Chinese businesses and people, they can also benefit by cooperating with UK. And geopolitically, as we saw in the recent years, there's been use of trade policy recklessly by US, and some of the closest ally, including the UK, have borne the brunt of that reckless trade policy and I would say reckless geopolitics. So in that environment, it is also appropriate for UK to have a better relationship with the rest of the world and specifically China, which is by some measure world largest economy and some measures world second largest economy. So therefore, this visit, I think, is very important.
So, Director Liang, going to you. As we can see, China and Britain have agreed to commit themselves to developing a long-term consistent, comprehensive strategic partnership. The two sides have also agreed to build a high-level climate and nature partnership. So, as U.S. President Donald Trump roils the world order, why is Beijing able to provide London with a consistent relationship that is centered on trade and on cooperation regarding global issues such as climate change?
Well, Ding, thank you for having me. Indeed, I think the one very fundamental, the very fresh, the outcome of the visit is about the evaluation of the bilateral trade relations. I fully agree with you that that the context of this question, and I think for me, one key reason that China is able to provide the UK with consistent relationship on trade and climate cooperation is policy continuity or predictability. And China's approach to trade and climate cooperation is rooted in long-term planning. And whether it's about the carbon neutrality targets or industrial upgrading or opening the services sectors, these are policies designed over decades, not years. And for the UK in particular on climate and green finance, China is a very important partner, I believe, that China is the world's largest investor in renewable energy and a critical player in global emission reduction. And don't forget, I'm very proud to mention that the Chinese manufacturers they excelled in producing the green products, let's say. So I would say that all of this had made the cooperation not just desirable, but necessary. So in a volatile global environment, while this predictability of the policies and cooperation itself become very important. It is a strategic asset.
Okay. So, Professor Cui Hongjian, going to you. Prime Minister Starmer says Britain does not need to choose between the U.S. and China. Now, I guess this is a voice that we have previously heard a lot from many non-Western countries, such as some particular country in Southeast Asia that hope to maintain workable or cordial ties with both Beijing and Washington. Why do you think London is sending this message right now?
As we know now, not only in the UK and also some other countries, perhaps they try to go beyond or get out from this so-called dilemma that they have to make a choice between China and the United States, or namely they have to take the side between two major players in the world. Especially for the UK, as we know, the UK used to be the so-called special partners with the United States, and the UK is one of the Western countries who used to stand close with the United States. Even now, yes, as we know, because of the tariffs issue, because of the geopolitical tension, and there are more and more, divergences between the UK and the United States. But still, I think that now maybe a most comfortable situation for the UK is try to stand in between the United States and China, because once the UK could, fulfill this purpose, and then to find out so-called space for a middle power like the UK, certainly it could get some maybe benefits from both China and the United States. But now I have to say that because of the more and more unilateral or more tough attitude from the United States towards its allies, including the UK, I think that the UK maybe have to try to keep the balance between two major powers, but at the same time, it has to make clear that it's not just a choice between two major players. So I think now the question for the UK and some other countries in the name of a so-called middle power, I think it's not the issue to have to make a choice between China and the United States. I think it could be an issue for them to make a decision. How could they continue or keep their development once they have to follow the so-called new rule proposed by the United States, more unilateral, more protectionist? I don't think that there will be space or there will be more opportunity for their development. On the other side, once they could make some joint efforts with China and to insist this kind of a globalization or kind of more fair and more more fair and a more pro-development
Yeah.
policy, I think indeed they could make some more, progress.
Yeah, I think the core idea is let's cooperate and shelve our differences and see what we can do together, realistically speaking. So, Director Liang, some say choosing between Beijing and Washington is actually a false dilemma because any independent country is supposed to be sovereign enough to manage multiple relationships, including multiple relationships with major powers. Do you agree?
Yes, definitely. I mean, for any sovereign country, managing multiple major relationships, not a weakness. It's a sign of strategic maturity. An idea that the countries must align exclusively with one power reflects I think, a Cold War mindset that no longer fits today's interconnected world. And we see a lot of recent statements, we heard that very signature speech at Davos from Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney about talking about the choices for middle powers. So I think this is this kind of reality that a lot of countries are faced with. And most economies today rely on diversified trade, investment, and technology flows. So treating the international relations as choices in not economics. I mean, if you have to choose between two, and I think this is very substantial, and it also, of course, ignores economic reality and limits policy options. So I think this is not something that the UK is faced with. I'm talking from the continent, just across the channel of the US. So this is kind of a sentiment now flowing on the other side of the channel as well. So it's not about choosing the side, but it's more about reconnections, and to some extent, this is a kind of a reality that needs a lot of countries to reconsider, recalibrate. And this is time at the moment. We do sense this kind of urge from not only from the UK, but also from Europe, from the continent as well.
So, Professor Nasir, domestically speaking, we understand Prime Minister Starmer's government has somewhat struggled to deliver the economic growth that it has promised and to ease a cost of living crisis for millions of households in Britain. And a key goal of his trip to China is to seek to diversify the UK's overseas markets and the supply chains for its industries. And we saw the two sides having agreed to hold a new round of economic dialogue over the course of this year or within this year, and to strengthen their two-way trade and investment. So from an purely economic perspective, do you see necessity for Britain to engage with China now?
Yes, indeed. I mean, the last few years, UK economy has faced various shocks. So we had COVID, we had Brexit, where we left European Union, and that has affected the economy negatively. And before that, there was global financial crisis, difficulties in the European economies, which is our largest trading partner. So in that climate, it is very important that UK seek partners in the other parts of the world. And Asia, particularly East and South Asia, has been growing very fast in the last few years. So there are a lot of opportunities for the British businesses and industries. Britain also need investment. For the last few years, the investment outlook has not been very good. And the public sector or the government is holding very large level of debt. And therefore, the cost of borrowing for the government is pretty high. It is more than the double what the Chinese government has to pay to borrow. So in that climate, the government is constrained to invest. So in that climate, then it is an appropriate strategy to seek partnership with other countries and businesses and industries in other countries to seek business opportunities and do business with them. So therefore, it can't be a better timing for the visit, and it can't be better timing in terms of enhancing cooperation, business to business, government to government, and people to people between China and UK.
So, Dr. Liang, we understand the services industry, such as finance and consulting, etc., is one area where Britain enjoys some advantages or strength. Actually, Britain is running a trade surplus in services in terms of its trading relationship with China. And China's policy directives are nowadays focused on boosting domestic consumption with a shift towards services industry from physical investment in physical infrastructure, and China is also committed to further opening up its services industry to foreign businesses. And during Starmer's visit, the two sides explored establishing a financial working group and holding a forum on insurance, for example. So, overall, what do you make of the opportunities that China may be able to provide for Britain's services industry?
Well, you are totally right. And I think I just read the Downing Street's press release that it held the achievement that about the progress that this visa has made regarding the service sector. For instance, that the two sides also try to explore the further service in trade agreement, So that's quite important, because we see that for Britain, the service sector accounts quite a big share of its GDP and excel in finance, consulting, education, insurance. And London, despite Brexit, the London states are still one of the world's finance hubs. So we do observe that the focusing on these service, this trip has really attached quite important emphasis in this part. So the opportunities that China can offer, it's enormous. Let's to conclude it like this. That, for instance, the finance, we do think, if I'm not mistaken, that UK is the country that China established its very, very first finance offices overseas for Bank of China. Basically, this like very historical landmark earlier than any countries of the world. So it enjoyed quite a special status for the finance sector. And we do think that now, if you have a look at the delegation, the business delegation that the UK Prime Minister has brought to China, among these over 50 business companies and whatever, I think there are quite a lot of household names of big banks. So this sector is quite of a lot of significance, this leads to say, but of great potential. And of course, there are other sides, for instance, consultancy and education. There are quite a lot. And you are quite right that China now has the blooming middle class and we do think that not only UK runs service trade in surplus with China, but also Europe as well. So basically that if you think about the market needs in China, such a huge size of markets, and then the service sector, it starts to grow, and I can imagine that how promising the market is for European countries, including UK. So just to conclude, I think first of all, the opportunities are immense, huge, giant, if I can put all those adjectives, and in concrete areas. And I think finance was highlighted in this trip, and of course, as I just mentioned, consultancy, education, insurance. We can name a lot. The list could be very, very long.
So, Professor Cui Hongjian, both David Cameron and Theresa May, when they were in office as the British Prime Ministers, they used the term a golden era to describe ties between London and Beijing. But later, ties between the two sides went through many years of twists and turns. Looking back, do you think the deterioration of the bilateral ties could have been avoided?
Also, this visit by the Prime Minister to China in the background that now both sides will not accept this current situation, especially a kind of long distance and even a little bit cold on the level of political and diplomatic exchange. But of course, both sides also try to make some joint efforts to help the business and also economy and trade to have some more areas, some more potential to be released. So yes, here is so-called golden era purpose for both two countries nearly 10 years ago. But maybe now it's not time to go back to so-called golden era. I think that now it's time to find out more pragmatic attitudes from both two sides. If we look at this common grounds this time for both two countries, we can find that to help both two sides to understand the value of the bilateral relations and to try to expand the benefits of the cooperation, not only to country and also to the peoples. I think could be very, very important purpose. So now how could China and the UK to keep the very pragmatic, location in the name of comprehensive strategic partnership? I think it's now very, very important and also even more realistic issues. Because as we know, recent years, some European countries, they try to change the perception about China, and even they try to reshape its policy towards China, and even try to change the location with China as a strategic partnership. So I think it's time for China and the UK to play a role to help other European countries and or even Western countries to understand how could China and the Western countries could achieve something. The China-US relations is not the whole of the China-Western country relations. So yes, I think the UK could play a more active role to help this close exchange with China, and also even to help China to understand what's a real demand, what's a real mindset from Western countries. So once something happens that way, undoubtedly it could be very, very, positive factors for the current geopolitical situation and even geoeconomic cooperation.
So, Professor Nasir, briefly before we're to take a short break in the middle of our show today, what lessons should be learned if we take a look at the several years of twists and turns in terms of the bilateral China-UK relationships?
What lesson we can learn by looking at, let's say, last 16 years. So the first half of these 16 years, you can say that the relationship on upward trajectory. They were on upward trajectory, and we saw cooperation between China and UK increasing, and there were the benefits of that. We saw increase in the business activity. We saw an increase in engagement between two economies. But then the second half, of the last 8 years or so, we saw that the relationship, they went cold, and that led to then an outcome which was not optimal. But now we have reignited that relationship. So I think lesson what we can learn is definitely that engagement is very important, particularly in the current climate when there's a lot of uncertainty and the economic tools are used for political purposes, and even there are risks coming from the closest ally of Britain. So in that environment, it is, I think the only thing it is sensible to do is to have a good relation with China. So I think, that is the lesson I think we could learn by looking at the recent history.
Your point's well taken. And let's take a very short break here. And coming back, our discussion will continue. Stay tuned. You're back with World Today. I'm Ding Heng in Beijing. Today we are talking about what is driving some of the closest allies of the United States to foster closer partnership with China. Joining our discussion, Muhammad Ali Nasir, Professor of Economics at the University of Leeds in Britain, Liang Linlin, Director of Communication and Research with China Chamber of Commerce to the European Union, and Professor Cui Hongjian from the Academy of Regional and Global Governance, Beijing Foreign Studies University. Professor Cui Hongjian, going back to you, it seems in terms of, or according to our recent memory, for example, if we take a look at the situation in 2023 and 2024 after the end of the COVID-19 pandemic, de-risk was a popular talking point on the part of some European leaders, European politicians, when they discuss how to deal with the relationship with China. But looking at the leaders from U.S. allies that China has hosted recently, especially prime ministers of Britain and Canada, can we put it this way, that Washington's recent policy moves, including on tariffs, Greenland, etc., have triggered a wave among its close allies to recalibrate their policies to de-risk from the United States?
Certainly. I think that even now, maybe some European countries, they are still reluctant to, realize or recognize that the United States has been, I think, the biggest game challenger for this so-called rule-based order. Also, we remember that during the Biden administration, some European countries and also Canada, they try to cooperate with the United States and to put claims about China and our capacity or some, China is destroying the rule-based order or some other. But now I think that the Trump administration and its policy not only very, very, clear, make American first policy. I think now it's becoming European countries as a victim of American interests. So I think it's out of the expectation of European countries and how to define the alliance with the United States. The Greenland issue, I think, give a very, very big, shock to European countries. I think it's the first time for this country to realize that the United States could do everything, even the military, behaviors to protect its interests and to destroy the co-interests of European countries. So I think now it's not the issue is China is trying to play a game and to get some more favorite from European countries. I think now it's the United States is push European countries to the other side. So I think it's not just the issue, just like I mentioned before, for the European countries to take a side between China and the U.S. They have to get some more, closer relations, dialogue, exchange with China. Once they try to protect their own interests, and once they try to get some more space for the foreign policy and for security concerns. So I think, yes, perhaps the biggest change of this current world order could be that the United States is doing something to make the so-called Western group into a collapse.
Okay. So, Director Liang, it is not just China that some of those traditional U.S. allies are looking at as they try to diversify relationships away from Washington. The newly signed trade agreement between the European Union and India is a clear signal that countries like India is also playing a big role in this new multipolar world. And between the EU and some Latin American countries, plan is also on the way for a trade deal, despite some internal opposition from some individual EU countries. But in the case of China, what do you think China is capable of offering to the Western countries that still have faith in rules-based international order, international cooperation, dialogue and consultation, and a multipolar or multilateralism?
Well, this is really the good question. And nowadays, when we talk about multilateralism and the global order itself, it sounds a little bit nostalgic sometimes. But the thing is that to believe is powerful, right? So China's belief in the multilateralism and the UN-led global world order itself are absolutely powerful. And China itself is deeply embedded in global institutions from WTO to climate frameworks, and it remains a key driver of global growth. I think that EU itself is a steady defendant of the multilateralism. So we do see a lot of interaction between the China and Europe, including UK, on the multilateral platforms. So basically, let's say that again, China is there. So if you think about all the global world order and the multilateralism, you realize that China, it is there. So it's not uncertain. So this importance of certainty, and it's absolutely essential for the believers of multilateralism. And against that, China is benefits from the order. I mean, if from the trade economic perspective, that China now grows as a major manufacturers of the after it joined WTO. So we also see that China has launched a lot of global initiative at the UN platforms and so on, and this has been quite a hit topic for a lot of countries, including a lot of European countries. So indeed, again, as I said, to believe itself is very powerful, and China, it is there. You can sense that the effort from China, that is to support the system. And this is essential. This is exactly like the business confidence. So you have to be believing something. And what China can offer, it is the confidence itself.
So, Professor Nasir, let's be frank about this. I mean, for close allies of the United States, the traditional close allies of the United States, their move to try to engage with China in a closer manner actually carries a risk of offending Washington. For example, President Donald Trump has warned Canada that he would slap 100% tariffs on all Canadian goods if a trade deal between China and Canada went ahead. And I am not sure how President Trump himself or White House officials would comment on Prime Minister Keir Starmer's visit to China this time. How can these countries, how can these U.S. ally countries cope with the pressure from Washington?
Yes, that is the way the U.S. been doing business for the last few years. The way America conducts its foreign policy and its trade policy and economic policy is different from, let's say, countries like China, where China actually promotes cooperation and is happy for other countries to engage with each other and do business with each other. In the case of United States, we see that very often United States push other countries to follow its desire in terms of maintaining their relationship with the rest of the world. And same, this was just one example where Mr. Trump threatened Canadians that 100% tariffs could be imposed on Canada in case of a trade deal between China and Canada. But if we look at the practicality of this threat and what happens if US really imposes 100% tariffs on Canada, that would be disastrous for the American economy, because America is dependent on Canada in terms of energy, and Canada is the largest trading partner of the United States. So tariff policy or tariff threats, they don't really work, or they backfire if you implement them. We did see under current administration that trade policy is used and is being used for the political purposes. And we also saw that so far it has not delivered any positive outcome. So if Mr. Trump goes ahead and imposes tariffs, that would not be a good thing for the not only Canadian economy but also for American economy. If I can bring to you the attention of your listeners,
Yeah.
I mean, anybody who's interested in the consequences, they may read a paper we wrote recently with colleagues at University of Leeds. The title is "The Economic Consequences of a Three-Front Trade War," in which we empirically showed that the US, Canada, and Mexico, among them, there is an agreement which we call USMCA, United States, Mexico, Canada Trade Agreement. And if US violates that agreement and imposes tariffs on Canada, Mexico, or China, or any other country, that would have negative consequences for the US economy. So there will be definitely cost, and 100% tariff is really, I think, too much, and it would be a big economic and financial crisis for not only Canadian economy, and Canada being the closest ally of United States. So politically, there will be consequences, but economically, there would also be consequences. One thing, if I may mention, that as compared to the predecessors of Mr. Trump, I mean, there is always political pressure from the US on the other countries for the economic purposes or political purposes. But what we see under Mr. Trump is that these things are now, announcements are made publicly. There are public announcements made about what US is going to do if this country is doing that or that country is doing that. And the trade policy is used very recklessly. And that is also a reason we do see that not only Canada, but the UK and the other allies, they are a little bit, I could say, frustrated with this policy, and they are trying to de-risk to some extent and have better relations with China, with India, and with the global south.
So, in other words, I guess, to paraphrase what you have elaborated, I guess there is a limit or there is a ceiling in terms of how far Washington can go in terms of placing pressure against its traditional allies not to forge closer ties with China or India, for that matter. Now, Professor Cui Hongjian, going back to you, we know between China and the United States, there is now a period of relative stability following a top leaders meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump in Busan, South Korea last year. So when some of the close allies of the United States are taking a sort of pragmatic approach and resetting their ties with China, what do you make of the possible impacts that such a scenario might generate for the bilateral relationship between Beijing and Washington?
Also, according to Chinese purpose, certainly to find out the approach to support a kind of general, stable, and also peaceful coexistence, and then to even explore some more opportunity of cooperation. I think could be a general expectation from Chinese side. So as we understand, if we take a long-term vision from the first administration of Trump to Biden administration, now the second term for Trump administration, I think the whole process or the whole change roughly, in the expectation of China. So I think now China become more confident when it faces so-called competition from the United States. And even now, as we know, Trump administration is reshaping its strategy worldwide and also regional level. So I think it will give some more, perhaps, new consideration for China, how to deal with this new policy or new strategy from the United States. Undoubtedly, I think the upcoming planning summit between President Xi and President Trump could make a very decisive, will play a very decisive role to help both two countries to understand, even, the middle term, how could they reach some common ground or consensus to stabilize the relations. If we look at this change of the tone from Trump administration, I think now there will be some more positive factors to support these expectations from both two sides. And I think now it's time for both countries to realize the China-U.S. relations is not just an issue of a bilateral level. It's also a very, very regional and global issue. Once China and the U.S., they could find out a way to manage their tensions and even try to grow up some more cooperative factors. Undoubtedly, it could be very, very helpful for the situation, for the general situation, and even maybe less geopolitical tension and more cooperative spaces for every country in the world.
So, Director Liang, on one hand, we saw Washington's policy moves indeed seems to be prompting its traditional Western allies to seek more stable partnership or stable relationship with China. But on the other hand, some of them continue to have this concern that China's manufacturing prowess and Chinese imports will undermine their own industries. And I think this concern is particularly noticeable with regard to some individual European countries. China says it has never deliberately pursued trade surplus, pledging to increase its imports of high-quality foreign goods. For example, during Prime Minister Keir Starmer's visit, China agreed to lower its import duty on British whiskey from 10% down to 5%. So, how can China and these countries manage their different perceptions regarding trade or industrial policies?
Well, you see, the Starmer's visit itself is the answer, isn't it? So dialogue, negotiations, engagements are absolutely key from the view of the business perspective, and that you are absolutely right that China has stated it does not pursue the trade surpluses deliberately. And during this trip, that China lowered the tariffs on British Scottish whiskey to 5% from the previously 10%, and we do all register a lot of this similar agreement, for instance, during the Canadian Prime Minister's visit to China as well regarding the electric cars. So dialogues, negotiations again are key. And then I would like to particularly stress from this perspective, talking about from Europe, that's not only UK, that we do also see that China and Europe as a whole are in talks regarding a lot of economic and trade matters. That, for instance, again, back on the EV talks, that only a couple of weeks ago that China and the EU reached the framework agreement regarding the price undertaking of this. So this is, I think, it all brings us to the very interesting dynamic that sometimes, you can't deny that, different economies, different powers, they may use different techniques for negotiations and whatever. But down to the earth, in the end, we need dialogue and we need negotiations to promote and to manage the differences. And I think, again, the UK's Prime Minister trip itself is absolutely telling and evident itself. So this could apply to other Western countries and other countries with trade relations with China as well. So I also quote what Euro observes about the trade with China. So majority of the trade with China stays not problematic, but we have probably small issues regarding specific areas. But we do believe, we do hope that this will be under control, under the framework of dialogue. And we need more and more engagement like this.
So, Professor Nasir, Chinese President Xi Jinping has long been talking about the world undergoing great changes unseen in a century. And quite coincidentally, during his address at the recent World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney also warns of rupture to global order. Now, some say the current paradigm shift in terms of the international politics, in terms of the global order, actually creates a bigger room for some particular countries to shelve their ideological differences, to shelve their differences in terms of value, for the sake of pragmatic cooperation. What is your take on this?
Yes, there are some geopolitical and economic realities in 21st century, in 2026, which need to be accounted for when we talk of the global order. And Prime Minister Carney just acknowledged that fact, coming from a former central banker. He was governor of the Bank of England previously, and before that he worked as an investment banker, and he worked in industry. So he is more pragmatic and realist, I think, as compared to maybe his predecessor. And it is very important to take that fact into account, that the world has changed. So I think President Xi, what he said is accurate, and that is a true reflection of how the world stands, and we should be real. For many, the rule-based system was never really there in the form many people perceived. Big powers like US, they did whatever they liked in the past, but that was the time what we called, which could be best described as the unipolar movement. That unipolar movement is gone. Now there are other major powers in the world, including China, politically or militarily, also Russia, and emerging other countries in the global south, for instance, India, which are economically, politically, or geopolitically, militarily in better shape than, let's say, 40 years ago. So these are the realities of 21st century, which Prime Minister Carney acknowledged in his speech. And that recognizing those realities is also, he has visited China and improved, which his visit definitely improved the relationship between Canada and China. And there's been trade tensions going on between Canada and China. Started mainly the trade war between China and Canada was started by his predecessor, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So Prime Minister Carney, being, I would say, more realistic, has resolved some of those issues with China by engagement and through engagement. And I think that is the best way forward for the other countries. And that's the reason you are seeing before Mr. Carney, President Macron, and now Prime Minister Keir Starmer has visited. And in the near future, I could expect that there would be more visits from the Western leaders and more engagement with the China. So that is the way forward. Of course, there would always be differences between and among countries, and we cannot resolve all differences and disputes overnight. But the best way forward is to engage, and that is something, that is the message also given by President Xi when he was welcoming Prime Minister Starmer, that we should engage and we should talk, and you are welcome in China, and that is the way forward. So I think that is a very sensible policy, and Prime Minister Carney was just being a realist when he made that speech.
Okay. So, by the way, Professor Nasir, do you think a scenario in which U.S. traditional allies are looking to diversify relationship away from Washington means more stability for the overall international order? Why or why not?
Yes, that's a good question. And I think what the allies are really seeking is to balance a little bit. We can look at the relationship in two aspects. One is the geopolitical aspect and dimension, where they are very happy to be aligned with the US on the geopolitical matters and the security matters. Uh, but then there is also an economic side where they would like to balance a little bit. So they would like to have a better relationship with China, India, and other countries, other emerging economies. So there is some element of de-risking economically. So if US uses the trade policy or economic policy as an instrument to implement its foreign policy or geopolitical interest, so at least some of his allies can de-risk themselves economically from the consequences of that policy or that stance. So therefore, in the foreseeable future, or we should not expect that these countries would de-link themselves or divorce United States completely on the geopolitical matters. But economically, definitely, they're trying to de-risk and mitigate or hedge some of the economic cost of reckless U.S. trade policy. That's how I see it.
So, Director Liang, the final question goes to you. I mean, President Donald Trump's policy is certainly a leading factor or one of the main factors pushing some traditional U.S. allies closer to China nowadays. But over the long term, how do you think China and these countries can, reinforce or solidify their partnership, their relationship to a point where they will be resilient enough and won't be affected too much by whatever policy coming out of Washington?
Happy to pick up the last questions. I think it's very beneficial to do it about the institutionalizing the cooperation. And I think the long-term resilience comes from the agreements, dialogue mechanism, business ties, and people-to-people exchange. So when cooperation is rooted in real economic activity, it becomes harder to reverse due to short-term political change. So that's how partnerships survive political circles.
Well, a big thank you to our panelists. Muhammad Ali Nasir, Professor of Economics at the University of Leeds in Britain, Liang Linlin, Director of Communication and Research with China Chamber of Commerce to the European Union, and Professor Cui Hongjian from Beijing Foreign Studies University. That's all the time for this edition of the program. I'm Ding Heng in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.